Picture this. For decades, the Caribbean has been America's backyard, boasting crystal blue waters, tourist destinations, and relatively peaceful maritime routes. The U.S. typically has just 2 or 3 American warships and Coast Guard cutters on patrol in the southern Caribbean. This was business as usual, manageable, predictable, controlled. The Caribbean Sea spans over 1 million square miles, connecting 30 countries and territories. More than $1.4 trillion in global trade passes through these waters annually. For America, it's been the southern gateway to the United States, a natural barrier that's helped protect the homeland for generations. But beneath this peaceful surface, something deadly was taking shape. Drug cartels weren't just operating in Mexico anymore. They'd discovered a new highway through the Caribbean, with Venezuela as their central launching pad. What was once a route for legitimate cargo ships and cruise liners had become a superhighway for cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs, killing Americans by the thousands. Venezuela's 1,800-mile coastline became the perfect launching point for high-speed boats carrying death to American communities. The numbers are staggering. Fentanyl alone kills over 70,000 Americans annually, with precursor chemicals flowing through Venezuelan ports from China, processed locally, then shipped north through the Caribbean island chain. Then came the moment that changed everything. In January 2025, President Trump signed an executive order directing the State Department to label Western Hemisphere drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. This was a declaration of war. On August 8th, Trump signed an order allowing military force against Latin American drug cartels designated as terrorist organizations. The gloves were off. America was about to respond to the fentanyl crisis not with traditional law enforcement, but with the full might of its military machine. The nuclear option. What happened next surprised military analysts worldwide. In late August 2025, the United States began a massive naval buildup in the southern Caribbean, officially to combat drug trafficking. But this was unlike any drug interdiction operation ever seen. The centerpiece of this unprecedented deployment? The USS Newport News, a Los Angeles-class nuclear-powered attack submarine. The Newport News, SSN 750, is the 3rd U.S. Navy ship named for Newport News, Virginia, and represents one of America's most capable underwater weapons. This isn't just any submarine. The Newport News stretches 360 feet in length and can dive to depths of over 800 feet. Powered by a nuclear reactor that can run for over 25 years without refueling, it can stay submerged for months, limited only by its 129-person crew's endurance. This is a ghost beneath the waves, capable of launching Tomahawk cruise missiles with surgical precision from 12 vertical launch tubes, armed with heavyweight Mark 48 torpedoes that can destroy enemy vessels before they know they're being hunted. The submarine's capabilities are genuinely terrifying. Each Tomahawk cruise missile can strike targets 1,000 miles away with pinpoint accuracy. Imagine hitting a building-sized target from the distance between New York and Miami. The Mark 48 torpedoes pack 650 pounds of high explosives and travel at speeds exceeding 55 knots underwater, faster than most surface ships can escape. The submarine's sonar can detect and track ships from hundreds of miles away, making it virtually undetectable until it chooses to launch an attack. America had just moved its silent killer to Venezuela's doorstep, but the Newport News wasn't going alone. By September 8th, the deployment included 8 ships, guided missile destroyers, USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson. Amphibious assault ship, USS Iwo Jima. Transport docks, USS San Antonio and USS Fort Lauderdale. Guided missile cruiser, USS Lake Erie. Littoral combat ship, USS Minneapolis-St. Paul. And the nuclear submarine, USS Newport News. This was more than a naval task force. It was a floating fortress capable of projecting American power across multiple domains. The force includes 4,500 service members, including over 2,000 Marines. America had assembled a strike group rivaling entire national navies. Each Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries 90 vertical launch cells firing deadly weapon combinations. They launch Tomahawk land attack missiles against targets hundreds of miles inland. Standard missile interceptors, shooting down aircraft and missiles, and submarine hunting ASROC rockets. The USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, was spotted passing through the Panama Canal by Agence France-Presse reporters, heading to the Caribbean. This warship carries 122 vertical launch cells, more firepower than most countries possess in their entire military. The amphibious component multiplies America's options exponentially. The USS Iwo Jima functions like a small aircraft carrier, operating AV-8B Harrier jump jets, MV-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft, and AH-1Z Cobra attack helicopters. The well deck launches landing craft air cushion vehicles, delivering Marines and equipment directly onto hostile beaches at speeds exceeding 40 knots. Venezuela fights back. As American warships converged on the Caribbean, Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, wasn't backing down. Venezuela is confronting the biggest threat seen on our continent in the last 100 years, Maduro told journalists. The stakes couldn't be higher for Maduro. Venezuela sits atop the world's largest proven oil reserves, which exceed 300 billion barrels, surpassing those of Saudi Arabia. These reserves aren't just Venezuela's economic lifeline, but a strategic prize that has attracted global powers for decades. Control of Venezuelan oil could significantly reshape global energy markets and alter geopolitical alliances worldwide. However, Venezuela under Maduro is no longer the prosperous oil giant it once was. Years of economic mismanagement, corruption, and international sanctions have crippled the country's ability to extract and export its black gold. Oil production has plummeted from over 3 million barrels per day in the 1990s to less than 1 million barrels per day today. The country that should be one of the world's wealthiest instead faces hyperinflation, widespread poverty, and a collapsing infrastructure. This desperation makes Maduro's regime both more dangerous and more vulnerable. On August 18th, Maduro said the U.S. has gone mad and renewed its threats to Venezuela's peace and tranquility. Whew. He announced deploying more than 4.5 million militia members around Venezuela. The Economist was skeptical, noting, election receipts show he received fewer than 3.8 million votes last year. It's improbable more people would fight to defend him than would vote for him. Venezuela's military, while vastly outgunned by American forces, isn't defenseless. The Venezuelan armed forces number approximately 123,000 active personnel, supported by reserves and militia. Their inventory includes Russian-supplied S-300 surface-to-air missile systems, which engage aircraft and cruise missiles at ranges of up to 200 kilometers. Venezuelan F-16 Fighting Falcons represent a serious air-to-air threat, though operational readiness is questionable due to parts shortages. More concerning for American planners are Venezuela's asymmetric capabilities. The country invested in coastal defense systems, including anti-ship missiles, threatening approaching naval vessels. Russian-supplied Bastion P coastal defense systems could launch P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles with ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. Venezuela's defense minister announced significant drone deployment and naval patrols along the Caribbean coast, including larger vessels further north in territorial waters. The Venezuelan Navy operates patrol boats and fast attack craft designed for coastal operations. Reports suggest Iran provided Venezuela drone technology, potentially including armed, unmanned aerial vehicles similar to those used in Middle Eastern conflicts. Both sides were preparing for scenarios ranging from limited skirmishes to full-scale combat, drawing in regional and global powers. Then came the moment that changed everything. On September 2nd, the U.S. announced a military vessel struck and sank a speedboat, allegedly smuggling drugs from Venezuela to the southern Caribbean during a high-seas interdiction mission. This wasn't a boarding. This wasn't an arrest. This was complete annihilation. Trump announced the attack from the White House, describing the target as loaded with narcotics, a lot of drugs bound for the United States. On Truth Social, Trump stated the operation killed 11 members of Tren de Aragua. The rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirmed the sinking on social media, stating the vessel was operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization. America was now eradicating the drug boats. Venezuela's response was swift and dangerous. On September 4th, 2 Venezuelan F-16 fighter jets flew over the USS Jason Dunham in response to U.S. Navy warships in Latin America. This was a direct provocation, with fighter jets buzzing an American destroyer in international waters. The Defense Department called it highly provocative and deployed 10 F-35 fighter jets and 2 MQ-9 Reaper drones to Puerto Rico. America had just moved advanced stealth fighters within striking distance of Venezuela. The Caribbean was becoming a powder keg. The implications were staggering. Venezuela told the UN that Washington's actions were a serious threat to regional peace and security, while the nuclear-powered attack submarine's presence was a clear act of intimidation. For the first time in decades, nuclear-powered submarines were part of the Caribbean power equation. The presence of the largest power's armed forces in the Caribbean Sea is a tension factor, Brazilian President Lula da Silva said during a BRICS summit. Even America's allies were concerned. This deployment was dividing the hemisphere. We will see what happens. It's not an option or a non-option, President Trump said when asked if the U.S. could oust Maduro from power. The U.S. president had just refused to rule out military action to remove a foreign leader. But was this really about drugs? The Economist said that few think drugs are the sole or even main focus of the operation, pointing out that fentanyl, causing the most U.S. deaths, is almost entirely synthesized in Mexico and trafficked north over land. The timing of this deployment, months after Maduro's contested July 2025 re-election, suggests Washington may be seeking to delegitimize his rule and trigger internal dissent or outright collapse. This wasn't just about stopping drugs. This was about regime change. By stationing Aegis destroyers, amphibious assault ships, Marines, and a nuclear-powered submarine within striking distance of Caracas, Washington demonstrates both will and capability to project overwhelming force against Maduro's regime. Global powers react. This deployment sent shockwaves far beyond the Caribbean. Venezuela has become a strategic partner for Russia, China, and Iran, with Moscow providing military advisors and weapons, Beijing investing in oil and infrastructure, and Tehran expanding drone technology cooperation. The geopolitical chess game extends far beyond the immediate region. Russia conducted joint military exercises with Venezuela and has landing rights for strategic bombers at Venezuelan air bases. This isn't just symbolic. Russian Tu-160 Blackjack strategic bombers, capable of carrying nuclear weapons, have actually landed in Venezuela multiple times, sending a clear message to Washington. Chinese investment in Venezuelan infrastructure exceeds $60 billion, including critical ports, telecommunications networks, and mining operations, which gives Beijing significant leverage over the region. Iran established a substantial presence, with Iranian tankers regularly violating U.S. sanctions to deliver fuel and receive Venezuelan gold, creating a sanctions-busting pipeline that directly challenges American economic warfare. China publicly condemned the U.S. naval deployment as interference of external forces in Venezuela's internal affairs. Beijing's concern runs deeper than diplomatic rhetoric. Chinese state-owned companies invested heavily in Venezuelan oil fields, and the collapse of the Maduro regime could jeopardize billions in investments. More troubling for Washington, China has been building dual-use infrastructure in Venezuela that could potentially support military operations, including deep-water ports capable of hosting Chinese naval vessels. The regional response but dangerously along ideological lines. Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, initially suggested any attack on Venezuela would equal an attack on Latin America. However, he later moderated his position after realizing the implications of supporting Maduro's narco-state. Brazil's President Lula called the American deployment a tension factor that threatens regional peace, reflecting broader South American concerns about U.S. military intervention. Mexico's response has been notably cautious, trying to balance its relationship with Washington while maintaining regional solidarity. However, some Caribbean nations support the deployment. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Dissesar, praised the deployment and September 2nd strike, saying, "The U.S. military should kill all drug traffickers violently." The standoff continues. This tense standoff continues today. U.S. forces in the Caribbean include F-35B fighter jets, V-22 Ospreys, MQ-9 Reaper drones, P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, and personnel stationed at Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico. These ships carry thousands of Marines, forming a strategic presence that deters criminal operations and signals U.S. power regionally. Venezuela hasn't backed down. Maduro mobilized the nation's armed forces across 284 battlefronts, engaging thousands of troops and militiamen in exercises dubbed Plan Independencia Soberana. A dangerous new precedent. What makes this crisis even more alarming is how America conducts these operations. Colombian President Gustavo Petro said attacking boat occupants and drug interdictions rather than capturing them amounted to murder. Senator Mark Warner worried about putting American sailors in harm's way by violating international law. America's actions have legal implications that are staggering and could reshape international maritime law. Traditional drug interdiction involves stopping, searching, and arresting suspects, not destroying vessels and killing everyone aboard. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea requires interdictions to be conducted with proportional force and respect for human life. Legal experts compare the September 2nd attack to extrajudicial killing, violating both U.S. and international law. The strike took place in international waters without warning, trial, or verification of cargo. No drugs were recovered because the boat and occupants were utterly destroyed. This sets a precedent that any international waters vessel can be targeted for destruction based solely on intelligence assessments, dangerously expanding what constitutes legitimate law enforcement. The incident raises troubling questions about due process and the rule of law. The 11 people killed on September 2nd had no surrender opportunity, no chance to prove innocence, and no access to legal representation. Their families have no justice recourse, and the international community has no mechanism to investigate potential war crimes by the world's most powerful military. Grandin said the strike was bringing Gaza's logic into the Caribbean in terms of unaccountability, impunity, and expansive national defense notion to justify what is essentially extrajudicial killing. This comparison of Middle Eastern conflicts suggests that America is applying counterterrorism tactics to law enforcement operations, blurring the lines between war and policing, with profound implications for international law. The broader implications extend beyond this single incident. If the United States can unilaterally declare drug traffickers terrorists, then kill them without trial in international waters, other nations might adopt similar tactics. China could justify attacking vessels carrying fentanyl precursors. Russia could target ships suspected of arms smuggling. The entire international maritime law framework could collapse into a might makes right system. America crossed a line by killing suspected drug traffickers without trial, evidence, or due process. And the international community watches nervously to see if this represents a new American global law enforcement approach or a dangerous aberration requiring correction.